random guy on the internet here, and this is episode 2 of the Invisible Influencer series, where we talk about all things middle age. Want to talk about working in your 50s today. One thing that I've developed as I've gotten older is that I actually feel like I contribute to society. I keep our transportation system running smoothly. Massive mental outlook adjustment from when I was younger. Back then everything felt like just a job that I had to do to make money, and there was no real sense of accomplishment or that I supplied any real tangible value to anything. It took me a few twists and turns and a couple different, changes in my career path. But, eventually I found something that I was good at and was a marketable skill. And that has kept me employed, for 2, 3 decades now. It feels like it all comes down to work ethic, decisions, timing, and luck. And you have to have all 4 of those things to succeed, like in the work sphere of life. I guess I feel like, things are going to change sometime soon, whether it's on my own terms or not. And that's what has me thinking about like work and career a little more lately. I finally realize that you need to do what's best for you and gives you a feeling of fulfillment, because this part of our work life journey, it's getting shorter. You're not, it's not 50 years of work left anymore. Now, to get down to the down and dirty of it, the really lucrative and sought after positions, at least in my line of work, are harder to get at this age due to corporations, wanting to hire younger and cheaper so-called talent. Not to mention they make stupid ass short-term decisions and short-sighted decisions that cause long-term problems that they don't seem willing to address. And you seem, to top out on pay, at a certain period, which is usually right around, in your 50s. It's like that's kind of what you're going to make by then, and they don't really want to go higher than that. Honestly, I feel like this is ageism, starting to show for the first time to me. Now granted, physically I'm not as fast, as I was before, and but I need more accommodation, but I work smarter and more efficient now, and I've definitely learned to say no a lot more than I used to, and I'm more apt to choose what's better for me than the company. I put a lot of thought into what I would like to do for the last, 10, 15 years of my prime working life. And I'm really interested in opening my own type of small business, for one, to make money. And 2, maybe it's something that my kids would want to keep going, and it kind of creates a little bit of a legacy for myself, after I'm unable to continue going. I know a lot of people, they get so wrapped up into their jobs that they feel like that is their identity. As in, like, I am a teacher or I am an electrician. Personally, I'm a mechanical engineer, but, I'm so much more than that. The career is part of who I am, but it's becoming a less defining aspect of my life. I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a sailboat captain, I'm a content creator. I could pick a dozen other things that can define me better, than my job. So how do you feel about, work at this stage of your life? Is it what you envisioned yourself doing now? Is it your identity? Or is it just a means to an end? Like money. Do you feel like you are being treated differently due to your age, even though we aren't really that old? We're just middle age. Or are you perfectly content and feel on top of the world with where you are? You know. Anyway, something to think about. And I'll catch you guys on the flip side. Deuces.